Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, when you really look at the ether that is the pop culture zeitgeist and layer that sort of sits in our culture, there are things inside of that transcend to a level that we never could have ever really expected. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more, in a light and in a conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because you're listening right now. Please subscribe to the podcast. You know, wherever you get your podcasts, we're pretty much everywhere. You can find us at Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, more or less everywhere. Hit those buttons and sign on board. And also, please don't forget that we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, and we are on Instagram at, you guessed it, we are at In the Seats. For all sorts of fun updates, and finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large, because if we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit. On this episode, we got a good one. Oh boy, we got a real good one. It's a film that is opening this coming Friday in various theaters all across the country, but specifically at the Varsity here in Toronto, at the 5th Avenue in Vancouver, and in Montreal before it expands throughout the summer in other cities across our fair country. It is called Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen, A Song, A Journey. It's now I know what you're thinking, another music doc, but no, this one is different. As much as this film explores the life of the man who was Leonard Cohen, it's all done through the prism of his unique and probably biggest song. It's almost a hymn, really. It is Hallelujah, and the film weaves it all together in some really interesting strands by looking at the songwriter and his times, looking at the song's dramatic journey from something that was rejected by the record label to something that was an iconic hit, and then also in talking to so many different artists for which Hallelujah, the song, has become such a personal touchstone to them, and it's got this international impact, which is just stunning to see. And I mean, the film was approved for production by Leonard Cohen himself before his 80th birthday, and it goes back into all sort of these archive materials to see his notebooks, to see how many different verses the song had, and we get photographs and journals and performance footage and these rare audio recordings. It's a fantastic piece of work from the directors of this documentary, Dan Geller and Dayna Goldfine. And we had the unique pleasure of sitting down and talking with them just about sort of the origin of the film, how it all got started, the unique sort of angle they took on the film, and so very much more. Rest assured, this is so much more than just your quote-unquote music documentary. This is a really fascinating piece of filmmaking that looks sort of at the importance of something in sort of, that exists in pop culture, and how it has sort of elevated to this very unique and special place for so many people. But like I said, this Friday, Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen, A Song, A Journey is opening in Toronto, Vancouver, and in Montreal, so go check it out. But first, please enjoy our talk with Dan Geller and Dayna Goldfine, because they were quite lovely, and between you and me, it's a really good talk, so enjoy. Well, obviously, just thank you both for the time today. I really appreciate this.
Of course,
Oh,
you're
we
welcome.
appreciate you giving us the time.
No, I mean, obviously, first off, just congratulations on the film. I mean, I really enjoyed it because I mean, I'll be honest. I went in expectations low just because there've been documentaries about Leonard before.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, I loved the angle you took on it, and I love the entire film. I mean, I guess my first question for you is, walk me through the origin of it all on your end.
Sure. I mean, it began 8 years ago, almost to the day. We were having dinner with David Thompson, who's a very well-known and respected film writer. And he just posed the question, what would it be like to do a documentary about a song? And initially, like for the first 10 minutes after that question was posed, I don't think either of us took it very seriously. And then all of a sudden, the image of Leonard on stage here in the Bay Area, he played at the Paramount at a couple times during his amazing 5-year round the world tour. That image of Leonard getting onto his knees, singing Hallelujah, which had immediately become indelible, came to mind. And it was like, oh my God, Dan, I know the song and I know the singer, and there's only one song and one, singer-songwriter who I would want to spend probably was going to be a number of years working with.
And that was before we knew much of anything, or truly anything, about the crazy story of the song itself. Not only how long it took Leonard Cohen to write it, but then that it was projected and then how it came to prominence after that. So we were curious about it even before we knew that there was a good cinematic plot that was
Right.
part of it.
Right. So the next day we, still thinking about that conversation, just typed, Leonard Cohen, Hallelujah into Google, and up came Alan Light's book, which had come out about 2 years prior. And we quickly read that and we were like, oh my God, our instincts were correct. There's something here. And then reached out to Alan, who came on board as a consulting producer and kind of coached us in how to approach Leonard, which, at that point, he was about to turn 80. He was not very receptive to the idea of doing interviews. So, and he hadn't done one for Alan's book, and it worked really well without it. So we approached Leonard through his manager, Robert Corey, and made it upfront clear, we're not asking for an interview, we're just asking for Leonard's blessing, so that we can go ahead with this project. And we got that very quickly.
Well, that's awesome. I love it. And I mean, it's one of those things where I guess from a pop culture standpoint, I mean, I loved just the appreciation of, I guess maybe the arc of it all, just how everything came about. And just for you both, how important was it for you to sort of find people who could give that trajectory, like to be able to talk to, people who interviewed him as opposed to sort of contemporaries at the time? I mean, you've got both, obviously, but
Yeah, our films generally, we like to have first-person participants tell this tale of what it was like, rather than someone from the outside. And it is interesting that there are people like Adrian Clarkson and Ratso who are journalists, but they became lifelong friends of Leonard. So that's inside outside in a way that felt right to us. And this was before we even knew that Ratso had all those audio tapes from that very first phone call onward, and that he was willing eventually to dig them up and give them to us. And I like the idea also that in this case that the obstacle of Leonard not being a contemporary interview that we shot forced us into the creative move to use interviews starting from 1966 onward, so that everyone ages in a cohort with Leonard,
right,
and you watch him mature. So I think it feels like you're watching someone in the present tense almost all the way through the movie, and rather than a retrospective.
For sure, absolutely.
Yeah, and interviews led to other interviews. So, for instance, we interviewed Judy Collins not that far into the production, and at the end of the interview, we'd had a good time, and she loved that we'd put her on stage at the town hall. And she turned to us and said, "Have you guys spoken with Nancy Bacall?" And we said, "No, who's that?" And she said, "Oh, wow, I'm connecting you, because Nancy was friends with Leonard from the time they were in grade school and all the way through the end of his life." And she sort of laid out who Nancy Bacall was. And then Judy Collins herself made that introduction. So, it was it was one of those blessed projects where as long as our ears and eyes were open and our arms were open and we were willing to take those paths that were opened to us, one thing led to another.
Well, I mean, that dovetails into my next question, because this is something that always fascinates me. I mean, there is no sort of Leonard archive, treasure trove, or archive where you can go and just get everything. You have to sort of unearth, and everything comes along. Like, it feels like you're filmmaking without a net kind of thing. Like, is that the process when you're making something like this? Because you never necessarily know where it's going to go from one interview to the next.
It seems that in the wake of our films, at least a couple of them, the archives get made right around the time we're finishing. So with Something Venture, the movie we did about Risk Reward, the original venture capitalist, all our original footage went into an archive that then was generated right around that moment at Stanford University and at the Smithsonian Institute. In this case, all of the material that Leonard had scattered all over the place, all of that memorabilia, all his archives are slowly coming in to basically the clearinghouse that Robert Corey and company are amalgamating, so that along with everything we've shot and all the transcripts, that becomes the official Leonard Cohen archive that will be available to scholars and presumably future filmmakers and book writers. So we're just a little too far ahead of the time. Now everyone else gets to benefit by that. But I am glad that we were some of the first to be able to see those journals, see those Polaroid photos. I mean, that was an incredible privilege.
Right. And I mean, we really worked to get access to those. So, even to get Robert Corey, the head of the Leonard Cohen Family Trust and Leonard's longtime manager, to admit that they existed took us a few years. They were these mythical things that Ratzo and other people referred to, but to get to see them with our own eyes and then ultimately include them in this film, it was a long journey. I mean, I think the term working without a net is very apropos, and I think it's probably apropos to most documentarians.
Or maybe digging around the yard for acorns.
Yeah. But I mean, for me, it's one of the things I always say to Dan, and I'm not speaking for him, I'm speaking for myself, that if I'm not a little bit terrified when we first start off on the making of a new documentary, then I know that I haven't bitten off enough.
For sure. No, and I mean, it's one of those things, I mean, particularly with the album as well, because I mean, that album had so many iconic tracks, which just, got ignored for North America. And then it kind of got just pushed away. And then Jeff re-recorded the song, and then it took on a whole new life. I'm kind of curious from your perspective in terms of getting people to sit down and talk with you, because to me, that's where, as much as I'm fascinated by Leonard's story and sort of seeing the arc of his career and everything, that's where the song managed to take on a life of its own, at least for me. Like, how important was that for you to sort of really delineate that Hallelujah was beyond sort of what Leonard had become?
It was crucial to the story, because I think even Leonard knew that this song became its own entity outside of any other song, amazing songs that he had written. And I think what Dayna and I wanted to do in interviewing people like Brandy Carlisle or Eric Church was not to have them define what the song means, but rather, what did it mean to them? Why did they choose the song? And I was hoping with Dayna that in doing this, we would open it up so that whatever any individual's interpretation would be, and as interesting as that would be, would not set a pattern, that everyone was coming at it from a slightly different angle. And that helps, again, illuminate why this song is so strange, in that it floats above any one person's interpretation, including Leonard's.
Right. I mean, I think it's longevity and the fact that it has international traction is reflective of the depth of the song, and kudos to Leonard for never defining what it meant in any way, shape, or form. You could take each line of that song and make it your own, and I think that was his gift to musicians and other singers that wanted to take it on, and I think it was his gift to the world of listeners as well.
There's that. It's Talmudic. The Talmudic way of analyzing things is through what it is not, right? That's a very specific thing. It's a Midrash or Talmud, I forget, but what it is not. And I think it just pops into my head now that Like, it's not a cry that you hear at night. It's not somebody who's seen the light. I mean, it's interesting. He's directly pulling from that tradition of defining something by what it's not. And by doing so, you never get to the thing itself, right? Because you can keep shaving it away by what it's not, but what it could be could still sit out there. And I think that those lyrics work that way.
Well, even when you interchange them and take some out and put some in or cut it down or expand it, it's one of those things where it's gone beyond being a piece of music. And I mean, in sort of the interviews you got, I definitely got the sense that it had evolved past Leonard, and even Leonard, with some of the footage that you guys had, the Leonard understood that the song had evolved past him. And I mean, I think that, I mean, not to spoil it for people, but I think that that gets summed up beautifully in just the last scene of the movie where you have this clip with Leonard sitting there. And I mean, it's such a fantastic line. I mean, what was there like high fives in the room when you found that clip? Just because that was such a perfect ending for the film.
Oh, absolutely. So, we had seen that documentary with German, not subtitles,
right,
but German voiceover. So we'd never heard Leonard actually saying that line. We'd just seen it and heard this German guy speaking over it. So when we found the actual footage where Leonard was speaking that in English, it was just like, oh my God, this is pure gold. Absolutely.
For everyone that you got to talk to, everyone, like, was there anyone you couldn't get? Because it seemed like every person you got to sit down with was just sort of overjoyed to be there and talk about the song and talk about Leonard as well.
Yeah, there were two. One was Walter Yetnikoff, the CBS or the Columbia Records executive who rejected the album. But we were told through channels and through his wife that he was already beginning to suffer from some dementia.
Right.
And so that obviously we couldn't do. And then the other was Jennifer Warnes, who would have been wonderful. But Jennifer, from everything we understand, first of all, is a very private person. And by the time we approached her, it was not long after Leonard had passed away. Mm-hmm. And she was pretty well shaken up by that, as one would expect. So really, Jennifer is the one. But I feel that because we had Sharon there, Sharon Robinson, who's so great and could speak to many of the same concerns about touring, about Leonard's preoccupation, about songwriting with Leonard, that felt like we really, in some ways, sometimes it's the unexpected person who winds up giving something so special to the movie, and Sharon was that for us.
Yeah, I mean, every single project, I would hazard a guess that if you talk to any documentarian, there's going to be someone that eluded their grasp. So, those two are the ones, and you just work around it. You make the best of it. We did feel like it was important to give Jennifer Warnes just a little nod, so you see her presence. But we also very much respected her decision not to be interviewed.
At the end of the day, I think I was really so surprised, pleasantly so, by just how the film made him human, or humanized him, I guess would be the right word. And as we see that in parallel with the song, it just all makes so much sense. And I mean, for you guys, when did you know that you were making something that was going to be more than just sort of a pop culture zeitgeist examination of the song, but really sort of giving us a portrait on who he was as a person?
Kind of early on. I mean, we never referred to it as a biography of Leonard Cohen, or probably Leonard and his then manager, now head of the trust, would have looked askance and not let us, given us that sort of blessing. But I like to say that when we started in on this path, I did think of Leonard as a god. And I thought, who are we to be making this documentary about this, godlike creature? And Dan was the one who encouraged me to take the first pass at the editing. And I said to him at the time, I don't think I can do it. It's Leonard Cohen. But as I started sitting with him in the editing room every single day and closely observing his words from early in his life all the way through to the end, I realized, no, he's not a god. What's so wonderful about Leonard Cohen is that he's a man. He's a man who spent his entire life working incredibly hard on his own personal, spiritual, and personal growth.
Well, and you listen to these interviews, all these audio interviews and some TV interviews, it's almost as though he speaks in prose as he's answering these questions. And so the depth and also literary nature of his responses becomes so fascinating that it draws the movie toward this other part, that it's no longer, so much a pop song examination. It's more a reflection of this man's mind and journey. And the balance of the film began to shift that way. I mean, I think hopefully we managed to integrate both of those elements, but the balance began to shift a bit to say, this is really about this man plumbing his own yearnings and conflicts and looking at the wider world through that personal lens. And boy, the more you look at it, the more, I mean, those raw transcripts or those interviews, the more it just, you want to sit there listening to him over and over. He's so fascinating and funny.
I was just going to say the other thing that makes him human is his sense of humor. And that's something that I don't think either of us realized was as deep and rich as it really was until we started in on this film. He's one of the funniest guys ever. I mean, it's droll and dry, but that sense of humor is so there and present, and it brings him down to earth in a way that I think added to our ability to look at him as a man instead of a god.
Well, you know what? I mean, I think that's perfect. I mean, especially in that line of him being at the Zen retreat for 6 years. It's like, yeah, it was enough.
Right. I think I'll go down the mountain for a little while.
And also, as he says, I am a disciplined, but I couldn't hack it after a while. And also, as Nancy Bacall says, you're not supposed to be writing songs in Zazen, but that's what he was doing. So all of the messy conflicts of all of our lives play out, even in something as rigorous as the monastery, which, he needed to retreat for a while. And he says that it didn't fix anything, but he needed to look at himself for a while. And maybe that was part of a path toward ultimate relaxation, or maybe just aged out of angst. I don't know.
But you know what? You've both done a fantastic piece of work here, because, I mean, it allows us to examine and look at the artistry, but it never separates us from the artist, which is so important. And I think you've done a beautiful piece of work. And thank you so much for the time today.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. You're making my afternoon.
I know. Our only regret is that we can't witness it actually coming out into Leonard's, home country.
Right.
For sure.
But we're so excited that it's going there and that it's going on the big screen.
Yeah.
No, people are going to love it. I can't wait for audiences to see it, for sure. And again, thank you both for the time today.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.